So we're talking today about robotics and automation, and I think, Catherine, when you think robots, in a certain way that always seems futuristic, but actually robotics and automation has been around since probably the first industrial revolution. So why are we talking about this now, and what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, you're quite right. So robotics is kind of where we came in with all of this, the spinning jenny in the 1700s and things starting to be done by machines that used to be done by hand. The difference now is really the convergence of new technologies which are boosting robotics, boosting automation to another level. So if you think about all of the Industry 4.0 processes which are happening, we've got artificial intelligence boosting things, we've got digital twins, we've got Internet of Things. All of these things are coming together with sort of physical automation and taking us forward up to the next level.
So what we need right now is not spinning jennies. So what are we seeing? What sorts of things are being automated?
So one of the leaders for robotics, for manufacturing robotics and creating robotic systems is Japan. And there's a really nice little phrase in Japanese which is kiken, kitsui and kitenai. So that means dangerous, difficult and dirty. And that sort of encapsulates really nicely the kind of situations where robotics can help. So dangerous situations, you might have sometimes military environments, bomb disposal, that kind of thing. After major accidents where you've got dangerous environments or hazardous chemicals or nuclear accidents, that kind of thing. Very often robotic tools support dealing in those kind of environments where it's too dangerous for the humans to be involved. Difficult robotics, so for example surgery is a really good example of that. Brain surgery is done using robotic tools, many kind of surgery. The robotic tool can in many ways be more dexterous and can get to places that the human beings might not be able to, or perhaps it's incredibly delicate and the precision of the robotics is better, or things like very detailed welding jobs, that kind of thing. So difficult things where precision and extreme accuracy is required, and also dirty things. So I've already mentioned hazardous environments, cleaning up a hazardous environment, for example. There are even barn cleaning robots for the agricultural environment. So you've got those three big areas. The other one that I haven't mentioned is dull jobs. So the absolute classic of screwing the lids on toothpaste tubes. Things which are repetitive, simple, can be automated. They've long been a good option for robotics.
And then perhaps, I'm not sure whether it's just the last of dull jobs, but in terms of industries, which in the industrial setting, where are we seeing robotics making an impact?
Yeah, so it continues to be the automotive sector. There have been robotic production lines in car manufacture, for example, since the 1960s, and that's only continuing and getting more so. Robots themselves are made by robotic industrial processes, and the degree of automation can be really quite striking. So, for example, one of the major Japanese manufacturers, their robots are built by their own robots, and they only turn the lights on when they want to take photographs of the factory. So the whole process is completely automated. It runs 24/7 every day of the year, and it doesn't even need lights on because there are no humans involved in this process, and nobody needs to see in a lit visual sort of way. The robots obviously sense and operate in a completely different way. So another area where robotics is really important, industrial robotics is really important, is in the electronics sector, both for building hardware and that sort of thing, but also increasingly for building batteries, for manufacturing batteries, which is interesting because again the increase in demand for batteries is very much driven by the automotive sector because we're moving into electric vehicles rather than the combustion engine. So batteries again, and there again you've got many hazardous materials involved in the manufacture, so robotics are well suited to that as well.
And what about warehouse services? Because I know, I've seen some fantastic videos of robots being used in a warehouse setting. Is that something where robots are particularly well suited?
Yes, so we talked about robots that make stuff. Service robotics, which is robots that do things, are a really important growth area as well. And warehousing and customer fulfillment, so picking off the shelves the stock that the customer has ordered, is a really good example of this. The state of the art now is that you don't really have humans involved in the picking process. You have humans do the packaging bit still, but the state of the art, for example, is a factory where all of the stock is very densely packed together very efficient in terms of space, and the robots will run across it, picking up what the customer has ordered. And that system is a really nice example of the convergence that we mentioned earlier. So you have connectivity and sort of Internet of Things technology managing the robots using almost a sort of air traffic control network to control them. There's artificial intelligence in the systems that run the ordering of the picking, etc., to optimise everything, make sure it's as efficient as it can be. And it's also a really nice example, actually, of the whole sort of digital transformation aspect, where the businesses that have built these new technologies, these new customer fulfillment technologies for themselves, they're such valuable systems, if you like, that they're now able to actually sell them to third parties. They're selling the technology which they built for their own core e-commerce business. They're now lifting that up and selling it as a product in itself. So it's really interesting. So service robotics is another really important area. Other areas where you see service robotics, we've talked about medical, surgical tools already. That's another area. Also customer relations. Increasingly you see little bots in shops and you can interact with them, or perhaps it's a little bot that gives you a direct connection to a human being, customer relations person. So that's another area where service robotics is becoming really important. I suppose the only other area to mention is consumer robotics. Probably the best well-known examples are robot hoovers, robot lawnmowers, that kind of thing, and then also something that we have at home, some toys as well, toy robotics, which is not such a big commercial market, but it's something that perhaps many people will have come across at home.
So I can see that convergence of technologies is a key theme in robotics. Are there any other examples of convergence and where that is being used in robotics?
Yeah, so another really powerful example is the way that robots are actually being trained. The movement is being programmed into them. So traditionally, if you want a robot to move in a certain way, that needs to be coded into it. Each element of the movement has to be separately coded and worked out. Now, one of the revolutions that's happening in relation to artificial intelligence is this ability to give the system a target, define success and failure, if you like, and tell it the rules of the game, and then set it off to work it out itself. Set the system off so that it works out how to get from nothing to the goal, works it out itself. Now that's been used with robotics. So, and again, it's also using sort of digital twin type technology where you have a virtual replica of the physical thing, and then you can then trial and test things on the virtual version of something before you put the software into the physical version, and off it goes. So they have created, for example, a robotic hand. The physical hand was built and a digital twin was created, and then using the digital twin, the virtual replica, they used reinforcement learning, this sort of trial and error process of work it out for yourself type programming, and the hand, the robotic hand, the virtual one, worked out how to move the fingers so that it could manipulate a cube. And if you asked it to show a particular face, it would do that. And it wasn't programmed in how it needed to move. It was told to achieve a certain end, and then with computing power so that thousands and thousands and thousands of iterations were possible, it worked it out by trial and error. And then once that programming had been achieved, it was lifted out and put into the physical robot hand, which was then able to move this cube with the dexterity which had been developed sort of virtually. And robotic dexterity is one of the really hard challenges in all of this. It's one of the things that's very difficult to do. They did something similar with a four-legged robot, and they said they instructed the AI system to work out how to walk, to work out how to move along, and it did it itself. It wasn't programmed. Walking wasn't programmed into it. It was given a sort of deep learning neural network, reinforcement learning, and it worked it out for itself. So that's another really nice example of where advances in one area of the technology are benefiting robotics. Another example of convergence. Yeah,
and you mentioned the digital transformation aspect, the fact that businesses are transforming what they do as a result of what can be achieved through robotics. Now, that obviously poses some legal issues. Perhaps you could expand on some of the legal issues that robotics and automation pose?
Yeah, so actually following on directly from what I was just saying about reinforcement learning, one of the problems with artificial intelligence, as we know, is this sort of black box aspect, that because you don't program every step into it, you let it work it out for itself. Sometimes outcomes are developed deep within the neural network, which the humans didn't anticipate. This isn't different for robotics to any other application of artificial intelligence with a black box angle, but you have the liability issue of normally, as you know, in English law negligence, there has to be a chain of causation between this person is responsible for that thing, it was foreseeable that might go wrong, this person is therefore responsible for what did go wrong. And you have that chain of causation linking the responsibility, if you like, to the harm that was caused. And if you've got a black box AI system involved in that process somewhere so that the human had no idea that that might go wrong, it didn't tell the AI system to do that. The AI system generated that output within its own system, as it were. That can cause problems. There isn't an answer yet on how to deal with this that hasn't been sort of dealt with by the courts or by legislation yet, although it's something that perhaps can be dealt with under the contractual liability framework, the risk that you sort out in the contractual provisions, risk allocation. It can perhaps be sorted out with insurance, etc. But that's one of the problems. Another issue, so there are many of the issues are not particularly different or new with advances in robotics. I mean, these industrial robots in particular are incredibly powerful, potentially very dangerous. They're not smart in any way. They just follow their path and do their repeat the movement that they're designed to do. So you have sort of health and safety issues, but they're not different. They're not changing because of the advances in robotics. Perhaps one of the issues that is very high profile and has quite wide implications is the impact on the workforce, on the human workforce. Robotics, obviously, the whole point about automation is to make it so that you don't need a human being anymore to do it, and that obviously has implications on how you deploy your workforce, whether you need to retool your workforce, whether you need to restructure your workforce, etc. So there's big future of work type issues. OC, as you know, has done a really interesting report around those kind of issues, and that's absolutely the territory that we're in. And perhaps the last thing to say is it's an angle that doesn't often get thought about, but one of the ramifications of robotics is actually its impact on the taxman. So a robot doesn't get given a salary or a wage, and therefore a robot doesn't pay tax. And a robot doesn't take its money and go out and buy things in the shops. So a very significant proportion of the taxman's revenues in the UK, in the US, in many countries is actually either from taxes on salary, on income and national insurance, that kind of thing, or on secondary taxes, on indirect taxes on the things we spend our money on. So there's actually quite a big potential impact. Wide automation will be felt in the Treasury coffers. There will be an impact on it. So again, that it may be that down the line that will require some sort of legislative restructuring to make sure that revenues are sustained or restructured or changed, etc. So there's a sort of less obvious angle perhaps on the future of work aspects of all of this.
So the space for regulation and legislation will need to keep pace with some of the technical developments that we've seen in robotics.
Yeah, that's right, absolutely.
Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you.